your efforts in meeting the goals, requirements, and standards outlined in this new statewide bill, as well as to standardize the data transfer process from utility to customer so that the benchmarking process for building owners is streamlined and that the customer service needs on your end is dampened. And now we'll hear from Kim, who's going to run through more about the state program, the bill that's in place, and why they've decided to form the coalition.
Great, thanks. For those of you who might not know about the Colorado Energy Office, I thought I'd put up the requisite slide with our mission and vision. But just to make you aware that we are part of state government, we're part of the governor's office, and our mission is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and consumer energy costs by advancing clean energy, energy efficiency, and zero emission vehicles. And we do this for the benefit of all Coloradans. You can go to the next slide. You may have also heard that we have some pretty strong commitments to climate action here in the state. Back in the 2019 legislative session, there was a law passed called the Climate Action Plan to Reduce Pollution, and that established science-based targets for reducing greenhouse gas pollution 50% by 2030 and 90% by 2050. And as you also probably know, it is a goal of the Polis administration to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2040. So as part of that, our office, along with several other state agencies and the work of stakeholders, have been working on a greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap over the last year. And we actually just released that last week. So you can find the final report on our website. And I'll go through just a couple of slides to give a little bit more of a background for why we are pursuing this commercial building benchmarking legislation. So what the roadmap found was that in 2020, the largest emission sources came from transportation, electric power, oil and gas, and buildings make up the fourth largest source of emissions in the state. Interestingly, several years ago, electric power was the largest emitter, but transportation has taken its place as the electric power sector has really moved to decarbonize and add more renewable energy on the system. And as you know, several utilities, including some of those on the phone or on the call today, have made commitments to close coal-fired power plants in the next 9 or 10 years. And just a really brief snapshot of some of the key roadmap findings. Obviously, the largest or the bulk of the emissions reductions are really going to come from the electric power sector. We recognize this because we are on a downward trajectory of emissions coming from this sector, largely because the cost of renewables has come down and we are able to add more renewables onto the grid now. But that is not going to get us all the way to our climate goals. And so we need to take a number of other actions in the near term in order to meet our goals. So they include, of course, continuing the transition away from coal and towards renewables, achieving reductions in the oil and gas industry, accelerating the transition to electric cars. And I bolded the increasing building efficiency and electrification there because that is going to be an important strategy for meeting our goals as well, and one that I'm particularly devoted to here at the Energy Office. You can go to the next slide. And so that really brings us to the Building Energy Performance Act of 2021. This would be a statewide statute. The legislation is still being worked on. The draft is being worked on. We hope to release the draft bill over the next week or two. It is expected to be introduced when the legislature reconvenes in mid-February. I think the latest date might be around February 15th or so. And the bill will require most large commercial, multifamily, and public buildings 50,000 square feet or more to benchmark their energy use. The first compliance date for that will be June 1st, 2022. The bill also includes some building performance standards, and I'm not going to go into all the details of the bill here because we will be holding or scheduling some utility stakeholder outreach meetings over the next several weeks to go into more details about the actual bill and to talk about some of those requirements for building owners. But just to give you a broad brushstroke of what it is the performance standards will kick in for calendar year 2026. So building owners will be required to comply with building performance standards by June 1st of 2027. And the intent of the bill is to really provide a variety of pathways towards compliance with improving energy efficiency in buildings. And just to go over a little bit about what benchmarking is, if you're not aware, I should also mention that, of course, the City and County of Denver, City of Fort Collins, and the City of Boulder already have benchmarking ordinances. So this state effort is really just building on those early adopters and making it statewide. So we're really leveraging the experience and the foundation that these cities have already established in their benchmarking programs. But it's really, go back. But benchmarking is really just measuring and assessing energy performance in a building and comparing it to its peers, a large national data set of similar buildings. And by far, the most common tool that is used across the US is the free online benchmarking tool offered by the EPA called Energy Star Portfolio Manager. You can go to the next slide. This is just a snapshot or a map of the different cities and states across the US that currently have benchmarking programs. There are 3 other state programs in California, Washington, and New Jersey. And so Colorado would be the 4th statewide program. And as I kind of already alluded to this, but some of the benefits of this bill are that we really are looking at benchmarking and performance standards as a key strategy for reducing greenhouse gas pollution and enabling our state to meet our climate goals. Obviously, we really think it's important for buildings to improve their efficiency, and it's a great way to reduce spending on unnecessary waste. 1/3 of the large buildings in Colorado are already benchmarking, and we've contracted with Overlay to develop that statewide covered building list. So they're currently working on that now. And we contracted with them because we thought it was really important to work with utilities to, as Jess said, to really support them in this transition so that they can adopt, you guys can adopt best practices and being able to share data with building owners and make it easier. So this legislation, if adopted, which we're preparing for it already, it really aims to reduce energy costs for buildings, improve air quality, property values, and really help improve participation in utility-sponsored efficiency programs.
I don't need drama. I don't want.
So I think I'm going to do I turn it back to you now, Jess?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to take over on the next one, but I can handle this one as well. Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
So purpose of the coalition is to just bring together the Colorado utility companies and allow for a discourse to help with standardization, to help with ease of the transition, and to ensure owners needing to benchmark their buildings isn't going to be a burden on your staff, your time, your resources, that you're prepared to handle their requests as well as deliver their needs in a timely manner. So timeline for implementation when it comes to the utility requirements is January 1st, 2022. So by next January the 1st, we will need to have certain requirements in place depending on the size of the company. However, all utility companies will be required to implement some sort of changes. It will just vary on the scope and the scale. So that leads me in to the requirements for utility companies that will be outlined in this bill. This bill breaks utility companies down into two classifications based on customer size base. So qualifying utilities versus non-qualifying utilities. Qualifying utilities are defined in the bill as an electric or gas utility with 5,000 or more, or a natural gas supplier with 5 or more, active commercial and industrial service connections, accounts, or customers within Colorado. Non-qualifying utility companies, on the other hand, would be utilities or gas suppliers who do not meet those minimum service connections, accounts, or customer requirements within Colorado. So this might make more sense now after having filled out the survey as to why we asked which category you filled in, to give us a better idea of how those requirements were going to break down for your specific company, how many of you would be falling into that qualifying versus non-qualifying category in terms of resources we would provide and information we would pass along. So in terms of those specific requirements, qualifying utilities and non-qualifying utilities have similar requirements. However, they vary in detail, as well as a few additional ones that are just specific to the qualifying utilities. So we'll briefly run through these. The qualifying utility requirements, first one being they must provide easily accessible aggregated data to a customer within 30 days of the owner's request, and that request must be made through an easily navigable web portal or online request form with a single one-time password or multi-factor digital authentication. On the non-qualifying side, the differences would be the stipulation for the navigable web portal, as well as the online request form and the multi-factor digital authentication, as non-qualifying utilities will still have to provide owners with easily accessible aggregated data within 30 days of the request. That request can, for non-qualifying providers in that scope, be requested through phone line, through email, whereas for the qualifying providers, it would have to be through a web portal or online request form specifically to get that data. In terms of qualifying utilities, they must adopt an aggregation threshold that is no more than 4, and then make that aggregation threshold public information on their website. Non-qualifying utilities also have to adopt an aggregation threshold that is no more than 4. However, they aren't required to publish that on their website. Qualifying utilities are required to aggregate the data and either directly upload that data into the owner's benchmarking tool, deliver it in a spreadsheet template specified by the benchmarking tool, so one that is manually uploaded by the owner, but would then just populate all their data into their account easily from that spreadsheet without any manipulations, or delivered in another format that's approved by the office, would be determined at a later time and or specified in the bill before published. The last bit for qualifying utilities is that aggregated data must be provided at least on an annual basis until the owner revokes the request. So this would be either a monthly upload into their account or a monthly spreadsheet sent off, and or at least one spreadsheet including a full year's worth of data, or one upload including a full year's worth of months. In terms of the remaining non-qualifying utility requirements, it's worth noting that if you do grow in customer base to reach that minimum 5,000 or more customers' accounts as an electric or gas utility, as well as a natural gas supplier with 5 or more, if you end up hitting that gap, you will be required to meet the qualifying utility requirements outlined in the bill. So if you are on the edge, it might be worth considering if you plan on growing or developments happening and you think you will grow in the future, considering digging into the qualifying utility requirements a little bit more. And the final piece on the non-qualifying side is standardization of data disclosure. is a recommendation in terms of making everything run smoothly on your end as well as your customer end. Probably have a lot of questions here. We're going to dig into these over the next couple of meetings, a little bit more detail given into what specifically some items in here mean, what we mean by aggregated data, what we mean by the aggregation threshold, a whole handful of things like that. We'll dig into more detail in the future, but just as an overview of what's coming up and what would be required as now under the bill. So to break this down a little bit more generically across all utilities, regardless of size, you will need to provide easily accessible aggregated data to customers within 30 days of that request. You will need to adopt an aggregation threshold that's no more than 4, and then be able to manage tenant consent, privacy, and authorization forms.
And just real quick, we did have a question that came in around what do you mean by aggregation threshold?
Yeah.
There's no more than 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so aggregation threshold comes into play when you're working with a building that has multiple tenants. So privacy concerns surrounding data disclosure to an owner from private tenant use you're basically outlining what the threshold there is for needing tenant consent to release that data to the owner versus not needing tenant consent. So typically when they say an aggregation threshold that is no more than 4, that would mean if there are 4 or more tenants, that owner would not be required to get consent from their tenants. The utility company would go ahead and aggregate that data on the owner's behalf. Whereas if there was less than 4 tenants in the building, 4 or less, they would need to then get consent from those tenants in order to disclose the data to the owner in an aggregated fashion. So just a threshold in terms of privacy concerns that allows a utility company to, if there's an excessive amount of tenants, just go ahead and aggregate that data. Whereas if there's only a small amount, they would need a privacy release form signed in order to get that data disclosed to the owner.
And just we had another follow-up question around the number of tenants versus the number of meters for that aggregation.
Mm-hmm. And do you want to elaborate on that any further?
I can probably say. I think Kirk did a question around: is it based off of the number of tenants that are in a building or the number of meters? Our understanding is actually associated with the number of tenants or the number of
tenants. Yep.
So you could have 4 meters serving 1 tenant, but that wouldn't meet the threshold. You'd actually have to have 4 tenants or more, 4 accounts or more. Good
question. Yep.
Number of tenants is behind the meter information that's not always available.
Behind the meter information, so you would know the meter information and not who the tenant that controls those meters is that?
That's right.
Yeah.
We know customers.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so just a basic breakdown there in terms of having to implement some sort of policy regarding how you would aggregate data in those instances when there are a large amount or a few amount of tenants. Just to ensure privacy concerns, it really comes down to the fact that if you were to aggregate a small number of tenants together without their consent, you may be able to determine what use is coming from where. Whereas if it's a whole multitude of tenants, 5 or more, it would be pretty difficult for you to get an accurate idea there. So just comes down to privacy and making sure there's no legal concerns around getting this data collected on an aggregated basis. Good questions.
So again, I think we've got some more questions coming in here on who's responsible for tracking the number of tenants. So if there is only 2 tenants, data would still need to be reported. So the data will still need to be reported. It just comes down to the authorization that would be required from the tenant side. And again, if you're looking at it like one building that has a single account, even though they may have multiple tenants in that building, you still have an owner that has that account, and therefore they would have access to all of that data and be able to report on it. This really comes down to buildings where you have multiple accounts within a building, and you would need to get sign off from those individual tenants that have their own accounts. For which the main building owner would not have normal access to. Another question coming in around what if authorization is not given. So there is an exemption pathway. I know that's still up in the air within the bill of If tenant authorization is not provided and aggregation is not available, then the building owner could seek an exemption from the benchmarking requirement. Sorry, yes, I'll let you get back to it.
No, that's great. Thanks for hopping in there. I couldn't see those questions, so I appreciate that. Let me know if any others come up. So back to the generic slide in terms of overall requirements for the utilities. So these are just the basic 3 outlines that generically each would have to do across the board, although they differ just in terms of how they would have to play out based on those requirements we saw on this previous slide. These 3 items would just have to be ticked off the list regardless of size. When it comes to implementing these requirements, there are 3 main options from a different perspective on each in terms of what works best for your company. So it's in a range of time, short-term and long-term concerns, as well as cost. So, and it's a gradient that really varies based on what you are already doing internally, what you're looking to do internally moving forward, and if you plan on increasing your team in any capacity. So spreadsheet, auto upload, and customer interface here are our 3 options that are just the 3 main directions you can take these requirements. The spreadsheet option, and we'll dig into all 3 of these in more detail in future meetings, but as a basic overview, the spreadsheet option would just be entering in the building information into a spreadsheet, the format of which is from the tool the building owner is using to benchmark. So for instance, the EPA's Portfolio Manager benchmarking tool has a spreadsheet that you can download. And once it's filled out with information, the owner then can manually upload that spreadsheet back into their benchmarking tool, to which their data will then populate in there to account for the full year or the month, depending on how you're going to go about this spreadsheet. Auto upload is using a web-based tool in order to automatically upload the customer data into their benchmarking tool. So this would remove the owner from doing any manual work on entering their own data and would put that in the utility company's court. This can be done on a monthly basis or a yearly basis, which essentially just aggregates the whole building's usage and then uploads it into their benchmarking tool for them. So the data is all there, ready for them to submit. Customer interface is taking these 2 things a step further. And it's not only providing auto upload to your customers, but it's also giving them basically a web portal where they can view their bills, make changes to their account, extra information in there that could help them in terms of just their overall energy usage. There are pros and cons to all 3 of these options. I would say at initial face value, it seems like cost might be on a gradient scale here from cheapest at the spreadsheet to most expensive on the customer interface side, of which I would agree. However, there are a lot of things involved to each of these pathways that will play into costs over time. One of which, when it comes to the spreadsheet side, is the extra customer service needs and or new employees you might need to hire in order to allow for this spreadsheet situation to work at a larger scale. Depending on how many building owners are affected in your region, you may have more or less customers coming to you than another company. A spreadsheet version just might not be the best option for you in terms of your own internal manpower. However, it might be the best for costs. So there are a lot of different things here, pros and cons wise, we'll dig into in future meetings. But just as a general overview of your basic 3 options that we can spin off of and find different solutions for in other directions. But I think these are some good overhead categories that fit any option you could choose kind of neatly into these 3 choices here. So future coalition workshops, we'll be discussing best practices, providing you with resources, having additional guest speakers, offering the opportunity to make connections here, as well as work together in order to implement these new standards. and requirements, as well as meet the deadline of January 1st. So upcoming, our next meeting is going to be on case studies and current examples. Unique problem solving will be a big part of this next meeting. We're going to have some speakers in from Excel, Fort Collins Utilities, and ideally Centerpoint. Centerpoint's just created their auto upload system and they serve Minnesota, but it's a good, I think, introduction to a different perspective in terms of what's going on there. Kirk from Fort Collins is going to join us in our next meeting as well. He'll be discussing his auto upload ventures, as well as Excel, who's been doing it for some time now, so we can get around an approach on experience there, as well as kind of where things can go in the future once you've already created auto upload, maybe bypass some stumble points that they ran into in doing that when they first got that started. So excited about next meeting in terms of digging into more of what we could offer, you could offer to your customers, get some current examples of what's going on right now. Future meetings, we'll have 6 scheduled as of right now. June, you can see here, is a flex month. This whole coalition and all of these workshops are designed primarily for you and will be based largely on your feedback in terms of what you need, what resources you're looking for, what help you want, which direction you're going. So June is going to be, in terms of content, a flex month in terms of what we all decide is best. Happy to extend these workshops as well through the year if we do need to do that. So keeping it flexible in terms of what works best, making this really a resource you can depend on. And that opens us up to Q&A, of which I'd love to now kind of get us all to go around and introduce ourselves, ask any questions we had, maybe start a dialogue on what people are hoping to see in the future and need in order to implement these mandates and new standards at their company. So anyone willing to be the guinea pig?
Sure. Rob Label. I'm with Atmos Energy, VP of Marketing here in Denver. And I put a question in the chat, but can we get a copy of this presentation? Because we'll definitely need to get our IT folks and corporate folks involved in looking at, these requirements and how we want to offer that. So. Yeah.
Hey, Rob. Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us. We will have all these resources available after this. After every meeting, we'll be putting the PowerPoint, a recording of the workshop, as well as resources and any deliverables that would kind of come alongside that on the CEO's website a day or two after the workshop.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Jessica, this is Dan Hodges with the Colorado Association of Municipal Utilities. We represent the 28 cities and towns in Colorado that own their municipal distribution systems. It's nice talking with you, and it's been great working with Kim on this, even back last year, and the team at CO on this. Are we still looking at sort of the same definitions for covered properties? Because that means a great deal, I think, when I look at the big challenge that's presented to a small utility, and I don't know if there's a good understanding on how small some municipal utilities are. And we're talking about communities. My smallest one has 220 some accounts, and the gentleman that runs the electric utility is also the dog catcher, the code enforcer, doing the water and wastewater systems, cleaning up the trash, in pretty much everything in town. And the town clerks, buried as it is, and the way they do billing is by postcards still. And people come down to town hall and pay their bill. Now, I don't know if we have any buildings in that community that meet the definition, as long as we're still thinking about exempting things like the grain elevator. The grain elevator is not envisioned there. I think it's okay if it is. You're putting a tremendous, not only unfunded mandate, but significant burden that they may not be able to tackle. So that's something we just want this group to be aware of when we're talking about small utilities. The quest for every and all, I think sometimes gives us a challenge that we can't easily overcome. When you look at the big bites out of the apple, I've got my members in Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, Longmont, Loveland, that are certainly able to do this well. You know, my members in Fountain, they have staff that can actually do this and track this, and you know, they have systems in place. So something to help us maybe wrap our heads around what are we really trying to solve here. And if we get to an area where we're looking at absolutely every single facility that meets this definition in the state that could potentially be in an area where the administrative burden is difficult to overcome, the one that comes readily to mind for me would be like, you know, Los Animas, where they serve the Fort Lyon facilities down there. And you've got a crew of like 3 linemen and then the town clerk. And this is a significant administrative burden on a group like that. Is there a way for CO to step in and help fill some of that administrative work, to come alongside and partner with some of these small communities if the goal is to hit every single facility in the state?
Yeah.
I don't know, Kim, you want to answer that? Or again, this is John Dierking with Overlay Consulting, working with the team here. So Daniel, I think that's a great question. And, you know, currently we are putting together a statewide list of all of the buildings that would be required to report through this benchmarking ordinance. And to your point around some of these smaller communities, some don't even have a building that would be required to report, or some maybe have 1 or 2. Because again, we're talking 50,000 square feet or larger. So those are pretty good sized buildings. Right. And so in that instance, the burden may be, you know, pretty minimal, or it's just like, hey, I just got to pull this guy's bills and provide it to him in a spreadsheet, and it takes me 20 minutes and I'm done. But, you know, I do understand your concern, how it could impact maybe those mid-size counties where they do have maybe, you know, 20 or 30 buildings, that it starts to become a little bit more of a burden. And again, we're trying to find what those issues may be and those kind of hurdles may be through this kind of monthly meeting, and then work to identify ways to address those, either through maybe some sourcing in the future, or if we can just provide them with documentation and great resources from our end to help them through the process. But, you know, again, our goal is to have that buildings list identified here in the next couple of months and be able to provide it to all the counties so they understand how many buildings would actually be required to report and what that lift would be from there in terms of providing monthly consumption data.
That's really awesome. I think that would be helpful, so we're not maybe speculating on, you know, where we may need to peel back the onion, and just would ask respectfully, if you're providing it to the counties, that you would provide it to the cities as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we'll be making that list public at some point in time once the bill has passed and once it's in a good enough place. And then obviously people are building new buildings, so that list will change over time. But our initial look at this is there's a lot of cities and counties that don't have very many buildings, 1 or 2 or 3 or none at all.
Can I ask you about what you just said there, that this information won't be available until after the bill has passed?
So we are putting together the master list as we speak, working with all of the county assessors throughout the state. And we hope to have a list together in the next month or 2. But that doesn't mean, they have a rough number of what that total count is for the entire state, but not on a county by county basis or a city by city basis just as of yet. Again, rough estimates, but not the final list.
So just from a process perspective, you know, it's a little concerning as we're looking to sort of perfect legislation, that we're making the assumption that we're going to pass legislation and then sort of back into you know, where the data falls out, and you know, and where we see the point of impact. That's just a little bit of concerning from a process standpoint, that we wouldn't try and have the information, you know, before we pass the finished product. So just more of an editorial comment there, and kind of maybe getting the cart ahead of the horse a little. But you know,
yeah,
we appreciate.
I don't want to overstate. I know Kim and her team has done a lot of work on this over the last year and a half, so I shouldn't overstep what I'm stating here in terms of building out this bill and addressing all that data. So Kim, I'm sure you can provide a lot more flavor than I can in terms of the amount of work that you guys have done in drafting the bill.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to provide some of that information. Obviously, once we get it, we just didn't want to release the entire list, public list, until Overlay has had a chance to clean it up and everything. Sure. But we'll be able to provide, you know, information. I mean, a lot of this information is publicly available. We're just cleaning it up, collecting it from county assessors' offices and things. So we really just wanted to get a better idea, Dan. You're exactly right. We wanted to find out exactly which buildings would be covered by this legislation to reduce the speculation and
Right.
concerns. So yeah, we are trying to accomplish that by the time the legislation is introduced, or at least soon thereafter.
That's super helpful. That helps us manage, unnecessary opposition. I mean, there's legitimate opposition, but sometimes, we see opposition to things that are just based on speculation. So if we can stamp that down early, it helps us sort of narrow down on what are the real problems. And if we can, narrow it down to like maybe a handful of communities, well, maybe we can work with them between you and us to figure out a great solution. So I appreciate that. And thanks for the clarification on that.
Yep, and as I mentioned, we will be scheduling a utility stakeholder meeting probably the week of February 8th to talk through more of the details in the bill with all of you. So we'll get you on our list, but if I'm not already acquainted with you, please feel free to send me an email. I'll put my email address in the chat and to get added to that list, and we'll invite you to that stakeholder meeting. And also wanted to introduce you to our new legislative liaison, Chris Piper. Dan, I think you already know him, which is awesome. He just started last week, so he'll be leading the charge for us from the Energy Office.
Worked with Chris for many years.
Great.
Well, thanks so much, Daniel. That was a very appreciated piece of feedback. I think that another point of the coalition here is to help circumvent those issues. So bringing that to our attention is very helpful in terms of the resources we can provide, what and when. So thank you so much.
This is Tim Coleman with the Colorado Rural Electric Association. I just wanted to chime in with a thought and a question, and wanted to reiterate some of Dan's concerns about the impact that this bill could have on some of our smaller utilities around the state. More specifically, I was wondering if there has been any talk around excluding commercial and industrial customers that have to do with agriculture, such as irrigation, which would drive a smaller co-op that serves a rural community up higher to that threshold, where that doesn't actually, kind of meet the intent of what the bill is going to be doing. Along with, there's a number of current programs that are looking at energy efficiency within the ag community as well. So I just wanted to see if that was a consideration, or if that's a question better suited for a stakeholder meeting.
Great question. Yeah, currently right now, covered property as it's defined in the bill does not include properties in which more than half of the gross floor area is used for manufacturing, industrial, or agricultural processes. Does that help answer the question?
A little bit, but I can just circle back with you all on that at a later time.
So essentially, covered properties are the only properties that would be subject to this ordinance. And so in terms of those properties that don't count, any building that is primarily used for manufacturing, industrial, or agricultural would not be included. So that would probably account for some of the larger buildings in those smaller counties. That is the current language, at least in the bill.
This is Kirk from Fort Collins. Just to clarify, so we define a process load in our kind of local requirements, and I'm curious to you guys, in the state bill, is there like a clear definition for process load? Because that could help differentiate some of these buildings for from a utilities customer's perspective.
That's a great question, Kirk. Kim, do you know?
Yeah, we do not define it by process load, and I'm going back through the definition as I wasn't involved with all of the different language in it, but right now we don't define it that way. But again, bring all these questions to the utility stakeholder meeting when we have other folks who are there who can speak more to some of those details.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. Joel Danforth here, United Power. I work for a utility, so it's part of my job description to gripe about bureaucracy. A couple of questions for you. One, follow-up to something that Brent Urich posted in the chat. What level of aggregation are we talking about here? Annual number? Monthly? What's that going to look like?
Yeah, great question. So the owners will need a full year's worth of data. On the aggregated side specifically, that would need to be in monthly usage and or yearly. Actually not sure if they specify that in such detail.
We aggregate by calendar month, calendar monthly totals. Not billing cycle, calendar.
Calendar month, yeah. Yeah, I think there's two different ways of doing it in terms of either calendarizing and or doing it by the monthly bill date. I don't think they specify that specifically in terms of which you have to use, just the two most common methods for aggregating.
Okay.
And that's something that we will talk about during some of the future meetings. You know, we have some utilities, just because we work with a number of utilities around the country that are doing the same thing. And some do aggregate it on a monthly basis to match up with bills. Others do it on a monthly basis just to match up with the, the beginning, the start and end of the month. And there's pros and cons of each. And some of that's just, part of the process of implementing the program from your end of how you want to present that. I mean, obviously we get a lot of customers who would rather see it match up with their bill just so that they can, confirm that it's accurate with what you're providing them. But sometimes that's easier said than done on the utility side of how they're aggregating the data.
Okay. Follow-up question to that, and this is where my gripe comes in. I think that I saw somewhere in the slides that there's a template that the state will use for this report. And did you want the data output from the utility to be in that format of that template?
Yes, ideally. So benchmarking tools often offer the option to have a spreadsheet you can download where you can type your bills, your monthly bills into it, and then you re-upload it into the benchmarking tool where it populates your data in there, as opposed to doing individual manual entries into your account. It would just upload all your data at once through a spreadsheet. So it would be the utility then filling in that type of spreadsheet to where the owner could just upload that easily into their account.
And we'll most likely be leaning on, Energy Star's portfolio manager template. They have an existing template that they would like to see all the data in that you can literally just upload, then it pushes it into your portfolio manager account. And so that would be the expectation, is either doing auto upload, putting it into the Energy Star upload template format. We are obviously open to discussion on what other templates may make sense for different building owners, but really we're trying to find something that's going to be standardized across the country, since we do have so many building owners that own multiple buildings and multiple jurisdictions, and just trying to make this very simple and easy for them. And at the end of the day, if it's easy for the building owner, it becomes easy for the utility. Otherwise, the utility just gets constant phone calls from building owners asking for, more data or changes to the data or questions around how the data is being provided to them. And it also comes down to the standardizations around units. It's not as big a deal on the electric side, but on the natural gas side, we see a lot of different units coming from the different types of utilities. That tends to confuse the building owners, which then causes questions to the utilities and so forth. So we're hoping to come up with some type of standard that everybody can agree to, whether it's the portfolio manager, auto upload, or some other format that can be used if you're not utilizing the auto upload tools that are available. And I know Kirk just posted their new data exchange portal. So if you want to see a utility that's doing this as an example, Kirk's got a good one that they just launched over in Fort Collins Utilities.
What about using meter data? Would that qualify? If we already provide that to our members through a portal, they can download that data themselves. Does it have to go into Portfolio Manager?
So again, depending on that threshold, we talked about the 5,000 customers. That would facilitate, below the 5,000 customer group. Yeah, you're providing it in a monthly format. You're providing within 30 days. For those that are above the 5,000 customer group, the expectation would be that you would provide it in, a similar type of Excel format but we would want that formatted into the Energy Star Portfolio Manager upload Excel file format.
This is Jacqueline. I'm with Intermountain Rural Electric Association, and I know we talked about it a little bit before. I guess I did ask to be in the utility stakeholder meeting as well, but we'll just need a little more clarification on the tenant versus meter question as well. Like the conversation before, you know, the tenants, we won't necessarily know how many tenants are behind the meter, but I understand your comment about one tenant could have multiple meters, and so we'll just have to continue that conversation probably in the stakeholder meetings.
Yeah, sounds great. It breaks down, I think maybe an easier way to think about it would be accounts. So if you had a building where, you know, you had a restaurant tenant and a storefront tenant, you know, a handful of different tenants, they all had their own utility account. The owner of that building then wouldn't be able to view their bills without their permission. So that's where the aggregation threshold comes into play in terms of who would be required to sign it. It would be the holders of the accounts. If there was less than 4 accounts at the building, they would all need to provide consent for their accounts information to be included in that building's aggregated data disclosure.
And just for your reference, each of our meters is a separate account.
So
I think just, you know, whatever verbiage is used, I don't know how everybody else does theirs, but like for ours, each meter has its own account number. So
yeah,
just probably some more discussion on that.
Yeah, good to know in terms of verbiage surrounding accounts, meters, tenants. I think that's definitely something we can elaborate on further and will do.
And the Public Utility Commission does have some guidance on this, which has been approved for privacy requirements, and that's really what's being adopted by the state. So we can provide more details on that as well. What's been approved at the Public Utility Commission level.
I totally understand. I realize this sounds a little off topic, but we've had a lot of issues with our organization as far as requests from outside entities with regards to marijuana growing and usage with regards to that with like, you know, police and sheriff's offices and things like that. And so we're very protective of our data, which is why we're interested in making sure that this definition is really tight so that we're not being asked to give that information over to other individuals in other situations as well. So just kind of give you a little background on that.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a good point. And again, there are, from a building level standpoint, obviously you're providing this information to the building, but from their reporting standpoint, they do have options to file for exemptions for, you know, specific reasons around privacy. If they believe that their energy consumption data is will impact their specific company because it's sharing secrets or sharing information about that organization, they do have the option to submit for exemption requests that way.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Did that get us through, everyone? Who's hiding here on us?
I can just quickly introduce myself. Tyler Carroll. I'm with Excel Energy, the program manager for the benchmarking team over at Excel. I also have, well, I don't know if she's still on the call or not, had marketing assistant Caitlin Hankey with me here.
Yep,
so
I'm
we're
here.
all excited. Okay, awesome. We're all excited to, we'll be presenting at the next coalition meeting and kind of give you some insight on our experiences with auto upload and that process. So yeah, looking forward to giving our insights and feedback, and looking forward to continue working with everyone. So.
Great. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Caitlin.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. This is Amy Fiella, and I'm with Black Hills Energy Natural Gas. I'm the Energy Efficiency Coordinator for the state of Colorado, and I'm just joining to learn more of the outside things that are going on within the business. And so thank you for presenting this. This is all interesting for me to put more into my tool belt. So thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Jeanette Padokas here with Holy Cross Energy. I'm the community relations representative, and I'm really excited for this. We've actually been doing some benchmarking stuff already with some of our bigger customers. We are working with Walking Mountain Science Center, trying to figure it out because it's not an easy process for benchmarking, especially when you have a building that has 20-some different meters with 20-some different accounts. So I'm eager to see what we can come up with to maybe streamline this a little bit. So
great. Thanks so much.
This is Caroline Medlock with Colorado Natural Gas. I'm the energy efficiency manager for our program, and I just wanted to thank you guys for heading this up. The working group structure is definitely helpful for us, so we certainly like that, and we're happy to be a part of it. And for everybody who's pointed out concerns and had questions, that's been really helpful too. I know once we see some language from the bill that we might have some more questions as well, so we'll be looking forward to that. But thank you guys so much for kicking this off today.
Thanks, Caroline.
This is Karen Yunker from Colorado Springs Utilities, and again, thank you for heading this up. I think one of our bigger concerns is going to be privacy of customers' data, and we've experienced in the past some customers have been unwilling to give the authorizations, or it's been very difficult to get those authorizations, and our threshold is much higher than the 4. And so I know the PUC for organizations such as ours requires 15 rather than the 4. So somewhat concerned about the level of 4 and for releasing data without customer authorizations.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Definitely a concern. I think with the 4, it should reduce the number of tenants you would need to submit consent. Right now, you would require it from 15 under. Is that right? Whereas
that
this
is correct.
Yeah,
yep.
This would require less consent. So your concern is that the less consent would be a problem?
That customers would be concerned that their data was easily, they could figure it out. I think maybe you've sort of addressed that. And if that is a concern, and particularly with a lot of government facilities, that is a concern, that we would be able to walk through a process with them to get an exemption.
Perfect. Yep. Thanks so much, Karen. Good feedback.
Hi, this is Carolyn Rail. I'm the supervisor of commercial billing at Summit Utilities. I thank you for the information and look forward to future meetings.
Thanks, Carolyn. Good to have you.
Hi, this is Brent Urich, also Colorado Springs Utilities. And the question I had, just for my own clarification, as we talk through premise counts and aggregation standards, is the expectation that the state provides the list of covered buildings, and that's something that you're currently working through? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so that once we have that list, then we can see the number of tenants in each building that you're asking for, and maybe answer some more questions of meter versus tenant and accounts and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what I think. It's a lot different if you say your building is a legal mandate that the data has to be provided versus counting premises and understanding where the square footage count comes from and all that. It makes it a lot easier from a utility standpoint to explain to a customer why their data is being provided, what the exception process is and all that stuff. So anyway, looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Thanks for that feedback as well. All right. Great, so we're almost at the end here. If anybody else wants to introduce themselves, feel free. Otherwise, I really appreciate your time today, and I'm looking forward to the rest of these sessions. All of your feedback in this Q&A time was very helpful in terms of guiding where we could go in the future, what you guys are looking for in terms of these next meetings and resources and content. So anything else in terms of feedback you have, feel free to reach out. My email is included in this PowerPoint, but I can also share it again here in this chat if that's helpful. More than happy to tailor these next sessions or format them in a way that's most useful to you. Really, we're doing this on behalf of you guys and what's most helpful in terms of meeting these standards, not trying to put a weight, trying to take the weight off. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and just again, follow up, Jess, we'll be sending out a copy of this PowerPoint to everybody that attended today, so you can look for that in your emails, as well as what Kim had indicated, we'll be posting it on the Colorado Energy Office's website here in the next few days once that's up and live.
Great. Well, thanks so much. I'll let you guys all go and looking forward to touching base with you in February.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.